Hello and welcome everybody to In Conversation With, which is my monthly chance to have a deep, in-depth conversation with a fabulous individual. We have the wonderful Rebecca Wright with us. Rebecca, well, I'm going to ask Rebecca to tell you all about her, but she's a mother. She is a wonderful healer. She is, in my view, a wise woman, certainly somebody who I have a lot of time for. Just the depth of knowledge and the passion that Rebecca puts into her work. So please do say hello, Rebecca, so that people can see you.
Well, hello, Maggie, and hello to everyone in the Hearth Space. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, it's our absolute pleasure. And for those of you who are joining us live in the Hearth Space, please do post any reflections, anything that lands with you while we're talking, any questions that you've got for Rebecca, and we will do our best to answer them during the course of the live as well as afterwards as well. Rebecca is in the Hearth Space, so she will be there too to be able to answer any questions that you have. So we're going to be talking about the theme of cruelty and compassion, which is the theme that we're working on with the goddess Hela, the goddess of the dead. And we're going to be talking about some of your work as a healer, the work that you do with women in particular. And I'm very aware that it is International Women's Day today, which is both an opportunity to celebrate how far we have come globally, but also to reflect on where we've come from and how far we still need to go. And you were sharing with me some of the origins and some of the key moments in this movement, Rebecca, before we went live. So I would love it if you would share that with the group. That'd be wonderful.
I woke up last night at about 3:30, and I was saying to Maggie, under the light of this full moon, and coming into International Women's Day, I was reminded of living in New York City and standing at the corner of Washington Square Park, where some of the origins of International Women's Day, some of the power behind it really comes from. So in 1911, International Women's Day, the first International Women's Day, took place on the 8th of March. And it might have been one of those things that kind of quietly comes and goes, except for a really cruel and tragic event that happened a couple of weeks later on the 25th of March of that same year. And I often feel like when I'm tapping into these stories, the energy of them. So their, labor conditions in those days were very different to what a lot of us in the West experience now. And there was a factory called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City, where women worked sewing, and they worked 12-hour shifts for very little wages, sweatshop conditions. And there was a movement in that time towards unionizing and towards campaigning for better working conditions for women. And in some places, these requests, these demands were being met positively, but in other places, less so. And the owners of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory were very against changing anything in their working conditions. So in an attempt to keep the women in and to keep those attempting to unionize out, they began locking the doors of the factory when the women were working. I just really feel a lot of the grief of this. And the end result was that a fire started in the factory and 146 women were killed. And I'll share in the group a link to some of the historical facts about this. But the end result was that a lot of the women did not get justice, but the outrage and the outcry against the cruelty led to a wave of compassion that did come through, and resulted some years later in a flurry of laws that improved working conditions in factories in the United States. So I feel a lot of that energy of cruelty and compassion underlines the power of International Women's Day still today. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. And I think it's so helpful when we are reminded of those origin stories. And like you say, the movement that could have been, a small piece and then nothing, a terrible tragedy that no one would want to happen occurred. And that knowledge that we try and build something good from that, but that it doesn't negate it doesn't make it okay, in any way is a difficult path to tread, to be able to say, yes, out of grief can arise something beautiful. And I think remembering those lessons as well is really important. When you were speaking, you were reminding me so much of how cruelty seeks to divide, to divide us, to make us feel small, to keep those who would advocate and champion for us away from us so that voices can't be heard. Now, all of those things come through. So there's still so much that we need to learn. And as you say, there are still in the world people whose voices are not heard, people who are being treated horrifically. It's not something that has passed. So it's something that we're working on all of the time. And that was a really beautiful opening to the theme of our interview. I'm going to say hello to Suki, who is saying a blessed Women's Day to all as well. Lovely to see you, Suki, in the chat. If you are with us live, do say hello and let us know what is landing with you. So thank you, Rebecca, for that story and for that context. And obviously, through the course of your work, you've moved sort of in and out of women's healing and women's spaces. I remember having a conversation with you when you were sort of talking about, I'm feeling drawn into that space. It's like a calling is what it feels like whenever I speak to you, and that journeying with and traveling with women, whether they're in that moment of ecstasy or the moment of intense pain. You are there walking beside them. And I say that from personal experience, that I've benefited so much from the support that you've offered me over the years. So it means a lot to me to be able to share this space with you and find out more about your work in the hearth space. So one of the things that Hela prompted me to think about with the idea of cruelty, both receiving cruelty, which we talk about quite a lot, but also people who are cruel, and most of us have been cruel at some point in our lives, even if it was not intended. As a rite of passage, she's offered this idea that it's a rite of passage. And for me, I've been feeling into it, saying, yes, if we don't have that rite of passage early on in our lives, cruelty continues. Into maturity, we carry that with us. She was talking about it as a place where we explore our own edges and where we discover our values as well, where we say it is never okay, wherever it is in the world, for workers to be trapped in a building and told, and separated from the people who care about them, and left for that to happen to them. So we learn that this is not okay with us. And she very specifically, she was talking about the role of family in creating a space where you can experience compassion and cruelty, our sort of early formative memories. And I know that you have 4 children, so you're a pretty good expert on this. I've been watching my own sons in a very different way, thinking about cruelty and compassion. But you've also shared some of your more challenging family relationships as well. So I wonder, what does that idea of cruelty as an initiator, what does that mean to you?
Yes, I was thinking a lot about this. And, as you say, motherhood and family are a huge part of my life and my work. And I think a lot that, sometimes our soul sets up the conditions that we need in our life, not just to shape us in the early part of our life, but also that we will continue to revisit the experiences that we have, spiraling around, looking at them and seeing them in different ways, throughout our existence. And the relationship that really comes to the center for me of cruelty and initiation is a relationship with my mother specifically, and with motherhood. So of course we all have the experience of mothering first, or motherhood first as a child, even if it is in the absence of that, because some of us, we are all born in one way or another. Some of us may not have a direct experience of, our mothers or a mother figure. In my case, and I guess I feel it is important to talk about this. I come from a very troubled female line, female genealogy, and I was the child of a mother who was not well equipped for mothering. She came from a background where she had experienced pretty horrific abuse in her own childhood and did not have the resources to change those patterns in herself, and then passing them down to, I was the oldest of her children, and so um, very much came in a place of being a shield where I could to my other siblings. um, I think over time, I take different perspectives on it. And but it as a very young child, you don't have the choice
Mm.
in what is coming at you. I would say that some of the ways that that experience initiated me, and some things I don't actually have memory of, but I have people telling me about the experiences. But it certainly brought out a real rage and fire against
Mhm.
injustice in me, because I definitely remember as quite a young child, protesting against some of the treatment. And actually, at the age of 5, having some power to put some boundaries and to say no to some of the things that were going on. And, so that definitely was a piece. Um, I think, and, a lot of us are here in this time. I think a lot of people in my generation and, in the bordering generations, we are here as cycle breakers. We have
Mm.
come in to change and alter some of the patterns that have been passed down ancestrally. And that is, on a soul level, why we have chosen to be here. It doesn't make it easy, but that is the role that some of us play. And certainly that is a role that I see myself playing. Um, so I experienced, the cruelty and the pain of being the child of a damaged mother. And then I had the experience of becoming a mother myself. And then as you may probably be aware, Maggie, you start to have some of those patterns that you said, oh, I would never do this. and then and then you start to hear these words coming out of your mouth, or you just, like, things happen automatically, and you start to realize how the programming that we received before the age of 7, and even before, even younger than that, before the age of any kind of consciousness, how deeply rooted in our cells and in our being it really is. And how our children then are a kind of initiation as well, bringing those patterns up for conscious awareness. And I feel that many of us, and certainly I include myself in this, we are much better resourced. And so we can recognize those patterns and we can start to engage with them in a conscious way.
Mm.
Um, and also we can have compassion for ourselves when we're not able to do that. And it starts to open compassion for the generations before us, and what they dealt with as well. Um, and this journey of motherhood, I know we're going to talk, go in a lot of different directions here. One of the most important parts of my own healing and initiation in terms of motherhood has been my journey with shamanism. And I think that one of the key elements of my capacity to embody deeper compassion for my own experiences as a child and for my own mother and ancestral line was in having pieces of me that had been taken by that experience restored to me. Um, so, I think if anybody listening is in a place where they have experienced the kind of cruelty in childhood or in anything else, it's okay to be angry about that, and it's okay to not necessarily feel forgiveness of people at a certain time. Um, and I think that it's only really for me when I got to the point of being restored to myself that I could embody those energies more fully. And that is the process to get there. I mean, I didn't get there until I was probably about 40. So, and
Yeah.
it's an ongoing journey, you know.
Yeah, we are all evolving, aren't we? And there's so much that I could draw out of that. I think what it really landed with me so powerfully when you were speaking was that sense in which we emerge into the world and new, but the initiatory experiences that we're going to have are formed by old energies. You know, that is part of what it means to be parented, or to not be parented is still an experience. And that sense of being initiated into the past, and like you say, that sense in which we do get those opportunities. We travel in the spiral and we get those opportunities to revisit. And you're right, and I do think you're right that again that there are so many people within this time who have been born not just to experience initiation themselves and to be reinitiated, but also to hold spaces for others, to say it is possible to reclaim power, it is possible to find forgiveness for yourself and for others. And that piece around compassion is so important as a capacity to look in the places that are painful and hard, knowing that none of us are perfect. You know, none of us are innocent. None of it. That saying, like, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, is such a ridiculous saying. It's like, if we're all sitting there in our glass houses not throwing stones, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, there's nothing like parenthood to teach you how imperfect you are.
Yeah.
And yes, and I think, and also we always have a choice in our actions, but sometimes our awareness of our capacity to choose only comes after we've made some pretty poor choices as well.
Yes.
And also, you know, I think one of the things that comes up for me around parenthood is sometimes, there are different perspectives that we hold in relationship. And so there are times where, as a mother, I may have behaved in a way that was, by my child perceived as cruel. And sometimes, I can say, yes, that was a mistake on my part. That was me needing to heal a pattern of violence or harm. But other times, as a parent, you might have a wider perspective of what is necessary and what is beneficial in the bigger scheme of things. And so, although the child may receive that experience as something that is cruel, it's still something that's held in love by the parent. And I think we can then, take that up to another level if we look at this as a part of our soul journey and what is being held for us by spirit. There are also some of those experiences where we, as an individual human being, experience them as cruel, but in the bigger perspective of the journey of our soul and that spirit is holding for us in terms of our own evolution, that pain and that it's, I find it really interesting that your theme has been cruelty and compassion, because I haven't thought a lot about cruelty before, but I think a lot about suffering and pain.
Mm.
So, the receiving, how we receive those experiences. But yeah, so, there's this element of perspective as well, and how sometimes the things that may be painful to us are, a necessary part of growth and of our capacity to expand and actually hold more of
Mm.
our own experience.
Yeah, we could go so deep into a mystical conversation about the soul at this point. I'm just I'm thinking about Hela, because she gave me this theme and I was quite nervous about it, when she's probably the theme that has activated something in me the most in the last 2.5 years of doing this work, because it does bring in judgment and culpability and guilt, and all of the things that we find difficult, and that sense in which he says we want to be able to say, you know, I would never be capable of locking hundreds of women in a building. You know, that we want to believe that of ourselves. That's something I would never do, but other humans could do that, and that makes us different. And one of the things that Hela, I think, is so trying to share with us is saying that, you know, the human experience is an individual experience. That's part of why we're born the way we are, and why we leave our past lives and memories and other stuff behind us. You know, we incarnate there, which I won't go into, but you know, it's one of the things that I believe. But to be able to say, and yet we as humans have that capacity within us, and we need to be able to grapple with that.
Yes.
To recognize that we're all humans.
Yes. I mean, I think you know that one of the roles that I've kind of taken on in recent time is as a heart-centered facilitator. And one of the things that has really attracted me to that work is the perspective that it all begins with us, and this is something like inside of us as an individual. So we begin with ourselves, then we work in relationship, and then we work in connection to the many. And you know, that resonates as true with me. And you know, yes, we might not, each of us, you know, Maggie and Rebecca might not go and physically lock the door, but there is, you know, we are individuals, but humanity, we are also a collective. And I feel that this is a movement that we are moving more, you know, we've moved, the pendulum has kind of swung in the direction of individualism. And now we are starting to understand our connection to the collective in new ways, and starting to understand again that we are not, you know, we aren't separate. Our experience is not separate. And we can begin to heal the patterns of cruelty that are out there in the world by connecting to those patterns in each one of us, and healing, you know, where am I being cruel? You know, where, you know, I might not be cruel in that way, but where in my life am I perpetuating cruelty? And how can I bring healing to that? Where in my life have I experienced cruelty? And where can I bring compassion to myself in that? And I think it's really important what you were saying about this idea of blame and wanting to push these things away from us, because these are the patterns that separate us. These are the patterns that create that division of, you know, us versus them, you know, always whenever we feel pain, needing to look for someone to pin the blame on, you know,
Yes.
and sometimes that person is us, but that's not really a helpful way to be. It's not going to get us very far. It just spirals us down further into suffering, you know, and an internalization of those patterns that are not helpful. I do think I've been listening lately to Brene Brown's most recent book, which is called Atlas of the Heart, where she goes into really helpful and detailed descriptions of a lot of the emotions that we experience, including distinguishing between guilt and shame. And I've forgotten the third thing that I was going to say. But there's another, but it's really, I think it's really worth listening to and really worth exploring, because these when we can understand the complexity of each of these feelings, then we are better able to untangle them within ourselves, and we are better able, you know, to restore ourselves, because these points of cruelty and these points of pain and suffering that we experience, you know, it's a way of collapsing in on ourselves. It's a damage to our own boundaries in a way that then, you know, we can create energetic blocks there. We can lose parts of ourselves to these stories. But I found, I don't know how other people, this is just my experience, I find my internal stories and my internal, you know, blaming, shaming, and cruelty to myself really is the most damaging, you know, aspect, because you might have the experience out there in the world, but the problem is taking it into your inner world and not letting it go, and just perpetuating that story again and again and again,
Yeah.
and to find ways to free ourselves from those patterns,
Yeah.
because it's a part of, but then it is a part of healing that pattern out in the world as well, when we can heal it in ourselves. So
Yeah, it's almost that you've got the wave going outwards of I start with the self and then the relationships and I go out into the world, but it's also a wave coming inwards where we receive, or that moment when we go, "Oh, that thing is a really bad thing. And I've done that thing. And I didn't realize it was a really bad thing. And now I'm also in the bad thing category, is we need to get past it. And I think can be incredibly difficult for people who are very committed to being positive forces for good in the world, to then find that shadow, for want of a better word, inside themselves, and to embrace that as well. It was a beautiful time actually to move on to the second question. I just want to say hello to Chen and Kat, and Maggie says that the amount of times I catch myself sounding like my mum, and it's true, we can hear it in our voice patterns and the way we hold ourselves, and all of these things tell us that we're receiving threads of connection from other people all of the time, that the self is a complex woven thing. Excuse me. But yeah, the second question, you've touched on it a little bit, I think, as that the heart-centered facilitation. But you say on your website, and I know it's true from having worked with you, that you receive clients where they are, And when you say that, it sounds really easy. Just receive clients where they are. It sounds straightforward, really easy, but it's actually a really difficult thing and an incredibly powerful thing to do. So, how has your life prepared you to hold that space?
it was funny when you asked me that, because I thought, I have no idea, Maggie. Um, do you think, I think that maybe, some parts we just bring in with us, right? Some parts of us are perhaps skills, qualities, characteristics that feel like they just come naturally to us, that we don't even notice, because it is so much a part of our own soul journey and our soul pattern. And however you want to think about that, I think about that over many, many lifetimes. I think the first important piece of this is perhaps the capacity to feel and experience pain and suffering yourself. Because if you cannot accept that capacity in yourself, then how can you accept that in somebody else? But that's not the end of it, because if that's where you get stuck, then you're stuck there. I think probably my best kind of training in this came from my work in the birth world, which started holding women's experiences of new motherhood, and the training that I did with La Leche League and breastfeeding counseling, and learning about, number one, active listening. So just being able to receive people's stories without needing to jump in and alter those stories in some way. And over the course of my training in supporting women in birth, I learned a lot of new ways of listening. I think, it can often be a temptation when you hear somebody's story and there's something in it that resonates with you. And again, thinking about the breastfeeding, because this is where it first came up for me. If you hear a mother and a baby are having trouble with breastfeeding because the woman has sore nipples and she's been, has nipple damage, it's very easy to say, oh, I know the answer to that. It must be this, this, and this, because this is my experience. But when you have a greater familiarity with the complexity of the situation, it could be any number of things. And so until you are able to receive her story and really listen to what it is that she's sharing, you won't be able to separate her story from your own. So you need to be able to listen. And the other piece of it is really respecting every individual as the expert on their own experience. I do not know. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I stay in the healing realm. And I feel that, my work is in the healing realm, and the energy healing realm is, I've always come from the perspective that I am not, obviously we bring the experiences and the knowledge and the learning and the wisdom that we bring, but I am not here to be more expert than you on your experience. You have your experience, I have my experience. And it's, if we can recognize the expertise and the kind of, heroism of each person in their own journey and their own story, then we can allow them to share that story without needing to jump in and change it, because they have their story, we have our story. And yes, we can brush up against each other and intersect, but each of us has our own kind of starring role in our lives. And also, I think all of us have had the experience of people jumping in and kind of suppressing our stories, whether that is saying, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, and sharing their story in place of ours, and it's not anything like what you're talking about, or just simply, having your voice and your experience erased, which is something that I have become a lot more cognizant of as my own experience has deviated from kind of the expected course of a lot of other people, say the majority. So we often can't see it if we are in that kind of major flow of the majority, which is why it's so important, for people to be there to listen. But you have to, birth has taught me that we have to be comfortable with sitting with other people's pain. If you cannot sit with other people's pain and, just be present with it, then you're not going to be able to hear their story. And I guess the final piece of it is also, just recognizing that in terms of the heart, everything is welcome. Like all of these pieces, we're talking about the initiations of cruelty, all of the pieces of the self are welcome. All of them are important. And so just being able to, be present with them.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing. It's like, as you say, there is there's a vast difference between being physically present, and actually being attentive, doing that. Well, I've talked to call it devoted listening. I think you gave it a different wording, but it is that deep listening to somebody else without trying to jump in, without trying to fix or to explain it to them, to say, oh, I know this too. And it's a very strong form of relationship building to offer a mirror story to somebody else, saying, I get you. It's about building rapport with the other person, but it doesn't help them with the journey of healing and acceptance and being received. It's a different type of listening.
It is. And, and I think we all have had experiences of maybe speaking out and telling a story where then we thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, because we have been that person that jumped in and said this, and this, oh, yes. And I think that sometimes those stories come out because they are also looking for a listener. So it depends, as you say, like we have different relationships with different people. And this is why it probably is important for some of our stories and some of our experiences to seek out somebody who's not within our usual social circle, because, friendships have certain expectations, certain bonds, each relationship being individual, so you might not be able to expect from a friend that they can meet you in that place necessarily, unless it's a particular type of friend. Or a family member, the same thing, because each of us is, holding our story in relation to a person as well. But we do see this a lot in terms of birth and difficult stories of birth. And I think that any woman who has had an experience of pregnancy probably has been a little bit of a magnet for other people's stories about their own experiences. And it often is because those stories haven't been received, and that there is that pain, that suffering, that cruelty is niggling at them and looking for an outlet, looking for a place where it can be received, and where that story can be restored to wholeness in some way, where that individual in relation to that story can be restored to wholeness.
Yeah. It's fascinating that you should say that, because it brings to mind for me a moment when I was preparing for this work with Hela, and I was sitting, and I like to work in a little quiet cafe when I'm doing my prep work, and I was writing what I was going to do and what was happening and all of these things. And then there were two women who came and they sat next to me at the table next to me, and they were speaking quite loudly, and they were exchanging birth stories, or rather they were exchanging exactly pregnancy loss stories. And you will know that for me, that's quite a big whoa. So it's interesting that should come up at the time when we're talking about that. And as I was sitting there, I was like, well, it's not my role to be receiving this story. I don't need to receive it. But I was like, oh, what is it? What's it still activating for me? And that for me is a key piece as a healer and as a facilitator of other people's journeys and wanting to listen to their stories, is to recognize that sometimes when you're holding that space, something will flutter, a little butterfly will flutter somewhere in the body, and you'll say, that I need attention to. And that ability that you develop over time to be able to say, okay, I will tend to, and I won't forget, and to come back is very important, I think, for anyone holding these types of spaces. So no, I just wanted to add that piece in. But it also reminded me that you helped me to write my my mothering ceremony for my first son, for my sort of first pregnancy, that got to the point where I was like, yay, it was going well, and that was beautiful. I know you couldn't be there because you were sick, but you wrote the ceremony with me. But before that ceremony, you did a very important ceremony called Closing the Bones for me, which is about closing and completing the experience of the losses that I experienced before, and recognizing that that was something that I needed to do. That was part of my story, and how profound that was. And I'm very much aware that in our society, we talk a lot about birth, but we don't talk so much about endings and completions, about that place of completing a cycle. And yeah, and I wonder what you think the impact of that might be.
I think that that there is a real push kind of in mainstream patriarchal society to always go for the next shiny object, the next achievement, go, 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 work, 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 always at the pinnacle and never anywhere else. And then you're kind of like dropping into these valleys of where you feel like a failure because you've constantly been up here achieving. And I feel that we have a real need to, to take those times of quietness and rest and retreats where we can explore and examine, the full range of what our experience has been, and to, as you've kind of touched on, honor those stories that we're holding within us. And to, initiation for me is always a big piece of it, is about a death and a releasing of something. And it is about also a gathering up of our own power and the application of the wisdom and the growth, and all of those pieces of things that we have received, so that we then are kind of putting ourselves together to then enter into the next, phase of the journey. And I know with birth, Pam England from Birthing from Within is really famous for talking about the labyrinth of birth, and how to get, when you give birth, you've traveled the labyrinth and you're right at the center, but you're only halfway there, because in order to really enter that full journey of motherhood and of your next stages, you have to travel back out again. So I think there's not, there is as you say, there's a real invisibility of a lot of these experiences. I know often, I'm not doing doula work anymore, but I used to be a doula. And a lot of times people would say, why has nobody told me about this, in terms of the new motherhood? And there is a real invisibility of a lot of those experiences. But I think it's because there are things that are not easy to be seen or accepted in terms of what we value as a kind of mainstream patriarchal Western society. So yes, I think that what's to be gained from having those kinds of ceremonies is a real integration of our own stories, a reclaiming of the parts of ourselves, the soul parts, the power that might otherwise be lost, and the capacity to release experiences that we're finished with, that have played their part. So.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the Norn schooled, of that which must be, and she is a goddess of completion of life, and she sort of cuts the threads so that more can come in. But she's also a goddess for me. She's always been a goddess of like knotting and fixing as well, as saying where has the tapestry become like stuck or damaged in some way, and it needs to be fixed in some way. And it is, for me, there is that completion that allows you to receive the whole. So yeah, that's done, and I'm claiming what I need to, and I think that is part of it, isn't it? It's sort of saying there is wisdom and value in each experience, but we have to journey all the way in to the spiral and all the way out again. And I do wonder whether in this world, and like you said, that more people I do think are being born to be to change, to bring about change, and to be perhaps the doulas of the new whatever is birthing in some way, and that they've chosen to do this. But also my belief that that's why some of the deities, like, so for me the northern tradition, but also my first really powerful goddess experience was with Hecate. And I know that a lot of people in the Hearthspace group have connections with her. And these darker goddesses like the Morrigan, I know a lot of people, I know you've worked with the Morrigan before, haven't you? As well as Hela, these goddesses who embody the shadow, the dark divine, are coming forward, I feel like in droves, to offer initiation and guidance and insight, often to people who don't have access to that within any form of human passing down. It's like we've lost so much of that, and so these wayfinder goddesses come and are offering that to us. It's certainly my view. I know Kali as well. There are people who work with her too in the group. So I wonder how that, people call it darkness, they call it shadow. I'm not sure if we should define it in that way, but that type of divine feminine energy, how is that featured in your work and your experience?
Well, my first really powerful experience, I would say, with this energy was with the Morrigan, as Maggie probably knows. And it is very entwined with my own motherhood journey and my journey in this area. And it was the Morrigan kind of just appeared to me, but a lot of the work that she's done with me, she helped me to reweave some of the family patterns of mother to daughter on an energetic level, working through those patterns of violence and abuse and harm, which were things on an energetic level that were beyond my capacity to, work myself. So she came in very strongly to do that work with me. And she also gave me a new heart, just like in that kind of, which is not really, Morgan's not really a mother goddess, but my relationship with her has been in that area of motherhood. And she replaced my heart, which was very big piece of my own healing journey. I think one of my biggest and first lessons with her was in coming to a new understanding of darkness and really having the very difficult piece of detaching my understanding of darkness from a binary, and I never thought of myself as being caught in that binary necessarily. I didn't really think of myself. I mean, as many people in the West, I did have experience of Christianity in church in my childhood, but it wasn't like that really felt conscious or major to me. But when the Morrigan came in for me, I realized how deeply rooted that binary of, darkness being equated with evil it's really on a subconscious, level. Often, it's rooted into Western culture, I think, in a lot of ways. And so one of the first steps for me of working with her was, pulling up those roots and understanding that darkness is not that binary, that it is something else, and that there are incredible qualities of darkness that we can't experience if we see it only in terms of that good and evil
Mm,
kind of
mm,
paradigm. Um, it is something that's quite difficult to put into words. I think that a lot of my experience as a mother and a lot of women's experiences, I can only speak to those things because that's my area of, knowledge, is that for some of us, especially with motherhood is a place where we break off from the mainstream paradigm of what is expected and what we know about ourselves and our lives. And for me, some parts of motherhood have been like kind of falling into a different level of reality that is like dropping down into a bit of a pit or something, where nobody, you can see the surface where you used to live, and you can see those stories that are playing out in that society that's playing out, but you're not a part of that anymore. And you're living in this kind of other realm where there might not be the language to express what it is that you're experiencing. Um, when I did, before I became a parent, I did a master's degree in um, Italian literature, but it was also in feminist theory. And my master's degree was about feminist discursive spaces and how we create the spaces of knowledge, and how we create, how there's a level of reality that exists that is unspoken. And that realm of darkness and the dark goddess, in some ways, we are, when these experiences of darkness give us access to a reality that is not yet necessarily spoken. And so when we
mm,
are having experiences and we begin to articulate what our experiences of these things are, we are shifting what exists in reality. We're shifting the stories, we're shifting the power that shapes the world and creates the reality that all of us are living. And so it is really important, that dark goddess energy. It is allowing us to reclaim, the stories of, sacred rage, you know, um, is a big piece of it. And, this is a huge gift to us to be able to feel, the anger that comes up in the face of cruelty, that
mm.
pushes against it. But also, and I imagine that many people will have had this experience if you've spent some time in those kind of shadow realms, is that there are a lot of gifts that are hidden there and things that you would not expect. And so we are often afraid of going into those places, but actually the things that we pull out are the most precious parts of ourselves. So
Yeah, you speak true, true, Rebecca. You know, it reminds me that if we think about Hela and Hecate and Kali and the Morrigan, that they may seem like dark or shadow goddesses to us, but actually all of them have their light bearers. Hela is half living, half dead, is the way she presents it. Hecate is a torch bearer, and it's almost like they've just, what's the word I'm looking for? They're helping us to explore our own darkness and the spaces that we find frightening, that we've lost, and the power that we've lost within that. But they are more than that. It's just that they are able to, again, with the receive, they're able to receive all in a way that perhaps, if I think about Odin, he stretches us outwards and upwards into, what's the next heroic act, and into the places of ecstasy that are beyond words, but it's sort of stretching outwards. And these goddesses are perhaps getting us to stretch back downwards into
yeah,
what
and
we've lost.
right. And I think, when you think of Hela as half living, half dead, it is such a there's no need to be afraid of the dead side of it, is really the lessons for me of, working with the Morgan, especially.
Mm.
This, it's a value judgment, it's a projection, it's a story of our upbringing, of our culture, that this is bad, frightening, evil in some way. Um, there's a real necessity and beauty in rest and in decay and in renewal. If we don't have the decay, we don't have the renewal. We don't have nurturance that is needed. And it is, there's a saying, I think it's the I Ching, pain is only, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's about pain versus suffering. We don't want to hold on to the suffering, but the pain itself is just an experience. Each of these things, they're just experiences, unless we put the value judgment, or unless we cling on to
Mm.
them in a particular way. Our words and our stories shape our experience of reality. Yes, there are experiences that are uncomfortable and painful. Um, but we have to get away from the binary of,
Yes.
that's so that's the real teaching of the dark goddesses to me.
Yeah, I like that. I like that very much. Now, obviously, in the hearth space, we talk about the Northern tradition, and it is deliberately an eclectic space where we can move through pantheons and experiences. And I sort of think to myself, it's unlikely that we've all had past lives that were just in one culture, one time. So we're all complex beings. But in terms of the Northern tradition, I would love to hear from you, because you were joined me for Yggdrasil's Path, my Northern Tradition shamanic program, back when I was teaching it in person. Now I do it online. But I'd love to know what the Northern tradition, like, specifically, like, means to you, what you carry with you from that aspect of just an experience.
Right. Well, the Northern tradition, just kind of like many things for me, just kind of dropped in at the right time. And I was I was in a workshop, just generally about moon energy and moon cycles. And we were doing a shamanic journey, and the rune Perthro appeared and dropped into my womb space. And then I panicked after and got in touch with Maggie and said, "What is this all about?" Um, and that was the initiation for me, of my connection into the Northern tradition. And I think, like you say, a lot of us have ongoing connections with different things. And for me, I think there must just be parts of my soul and that are connected with the Northern tradition. Everything for me, I'm very eclectic in my practice, and also, I would say, very practical. So everything that I do, I am bringing into, like, I go back and forth between ordinary and non-ordinary, and bringing things in, and everything is important for me to kind of bring through into my life and into the lives of people that are I'm in contact with. Um, the pieces of the Northern tradition that really are very strong for me are the Norns, are very, very important to me. And I guess that with that Perth rune coming in first is probably an indication of that. And the Desire Circle is incredibly important to me. I really feel with the Desire Circle that I feel very interwoven with them. And I feel that a part of my place and my role here is to hold a physical point of energy for them. There's a lot of back and forth where, I'm here to hold that energy and to be a part of, their weaving. And that is a lot of the work that I do. Freya is very important to me. And the runes always, I work with the runes in so many ways, seership, healing, and the stories of the Northern tradition are so important. I think that they can give a lot of inspiration, especially Maggie's telling of the stories,
Oh.
give us a lot of, inspiration in our own lives, and that the importance of our own actions and our own choices in, we have certain things that happen, but the power that we have to respond and to shape our own stories. And of course, Orlog and Weird are super important for me because of that, and doing a lot of working with Weird. So,
Mm, I,
and the soul complex as well, I'll just say, from Yggdrasil's, like learning, this, having a different conception, having this understanding of the soul was really, really important for me to, and it still is, like, especially, the understanding of the body as a part of the soul and all of those different pieces, some of them individual, some of them linking us to something that is really beyond ourselves as well. Your connection to the land, your connection to your circles. And, so yes, all of those things are important.
oh, thank you. Thank you. I do, for me, I do feel as if some of this work is almost, you were talking about shamanism being a form of soul, that we can retrieve parts of our power, parts of our souls. And for me, the Northern tradition work is almost like a collective soul retrieval, the bringing through of the stories and the ways of thinking about being that just makes sense. You go, oh, that suddenly explains things that I have felt but didn't have the words for, and it's the recovery of some of those words. So thank you. And yeah, the presence of the Desir circle, I think, is so important, particularly as during this phase of time when I do believe, a new paradigm, for want of a better word, is birthing, that the Desir circles being those spaces of holding and mothering and initiation support us in doing that. So thank you, Rebecca. That was a really beautiful reflection. I would love to know, which is your favorite rune and why? It's a mean
Well, it's funny
question.
because when you asked Katie Jarrod that question, the first thing and she said, "Oh, I like all of them," and I was like, "Oh, but Berkano, of course, is the first one that comes in for me." So I'll go with the first answer, right answer. But I don't really have a favorite. But I feel that Berkano probably is very resonant with my own energy and the energy that I carry through and the work that I'm here to do in a lot of ways. So that's what I
Oh,
love.
yes, I can feel that Bacano energy for you. And I think that is true, isn't it, really? We can sort of say, oh, this is my favorite rune. And sometimes it is because it's just resonating with us really strongly in the moment. And I just love to hear people's opinions of which rune is speaking to them now. Excuse me. So Chen is saying, just reflecting on what we've talked about, she's talking about Ovid's Metamorphosis in one of the poems where it talks about soul and life, and that everything is in constant transformation one way or another. And I think that's very true. And perhaps that's part of the not thinking in the binary about endings and beginnings and completions, and that actually we are continually evolving and changing, and every completion is a rebirthing, and every rebirthing is a completion waiting to happen. So yeah, thank you, Chen. Finally, I would love to hear more about your works. I know you've been sort of evolving and developing your new Star and Well, which is wonderful. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how it developed and evolved for you.
Right. Well, I would just like to say that the well of Star and Well is really inspired by the well of Weird and the Nornia. So I just, let you guys all in on that little secret. Um, but it is really a space for my healing work. And, I I mean, it is evolving and changing. It's looking like, but what is always constant for me is that my main purpose here is the healing of women, of mothers, of birthing, and that I'm really here for the healing of the mother lines, which we are all connected to, whether we ourselves identify as a mother, we are all children, we are all born into, these lineages. And I'm very happy to very soon be offering in-person sessions again in the north of England, if anybody northeast of England. But I do shamanic work, and I also do traditional women's healing, meson therapy, which is women's abdominal massage, and as Maggie's experience in closing the bones. But yes, that's the work that I'm here to do. I also do remote sessions of healing, energy work of various kinds, and I'm developing different communities and opportunities for women to work together.
Mm.
Again, mostly focused around birth and motherhood, because that's where I land with these things. So,
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited. So, cannot recommend Rebecca enough. If you are, anything that we have spoken about has resonated, if you're in a place where yeah, actually, I need some support of the depth and the experience that Rebecca has to offer, then please do reach out to her. I know that you're always open to talk to people. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you to everybody who has been watching the live or you've posted your questions. We will have a little look at some people you're watching the recording. Please do post there as well. We'll carry on the conversation, and Rebecca's contact details and her website are already underneath the video for you, and we'll make sure that when I put them up on the YouTube and on the blog that they will be there as well. So thank you so much, Rebecca. It's been wonderful.
thank you. Thank you.